COVID-19. How will it affect our mental health? Millions of Americans will be impacted by COVID-19 related illness, loss, grief, anxiety, isolation, and PTSD. And, perhaps counterintuitively, some of us will come out stronger. Experts weigh in on what we can expect from living through a global pandemic. This video brought to you by HealthyRN Ways channel that talks about the COVID-19 pandemic. Video posting every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. To see my other videos, see the link at the end card of this video. Many of the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic are undeniably difficult but also offer the opportunity for growth. What comes next? That's what everyone wants to know. What's going to happen with the economy? With my job? My health? The country? Will anything ever go back to normal? We have never lived through a time like this before. Yes, there have been moments, after the Great Depression, or World War II, or Vietnam. Periods of collective despair, misery, and suffering. But they had precedents. People had survived wars. They understood recessions. They knew what it was like to live through uncertainty. The closest traumatic events within our lived experience were 9/11 and the marathon bombing in Boston. A survey published in 2011 in American Psychologist of U.S. citizens 1 month after 9/11 reported that 9.7% had a major depressive disorder 5 to 8 weeks after the attacks and 12.4% had one within the first 6 months after. But even these events, monumental as they were, are not comparable. The difference is that 9/11 and the marathon bombing in Boston were more time compressed. This is months and months. The little research that does exist on the aftermath of a pandemic comes from the Spanish flu of 1918, an event distinctly outside of most people's frame of reference. In the research, which was presented in Denmark in 2010 at a workshop entitled, Historical Influenza Pandemics. Lessons Learned, researched asylum hospitalizations in Norway attributed to the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 and found that the number of patients hospitalized for the first time for psychological disorders, attributed to the flu, increased by an average annual factor of 7.2 for 6 years after the pandemic. That population of survivors also reported depression, dizziness, sleep impairment, mental distraction, and work difficulties. Will the aftermath of COVID-19 follow this pattern? Maybe. We don't know. The world is a different place. Too many variables have changed. For better or for worse, or both, the path ahead of us is all new. Here's what the experts we interviewed said about the likely challenges and unexpected benefits that likely lie ahead of us. The mental anguish that people are experiencing, not being able to be with loved ones in crisis, and not being able to properly mourn them with family and friends in community after they pass, is excruciating. It's unlike anything you can imagine. Death and loss are bad enough. But this is truly debilitating. The details of removal and burial are somewhat gruesome. The visual of how burials is not leaving my head. There's mass grief, the likes of which our generation has not seen before. But that grief is complicated by the traumatic circumstances of not being able to say goodbye to loved ones who died in nursing homes and hospitals, of not being able to hold memorials and funerals, and of having to grieve in isolation. The fallout is strained relationships and extended periods of grieving. It predicts that the scope of the losses, and the shared nature of the experience, will ultimately create understanding that could prompt a new conversation, perhaps even a new vocabulary, around grief, as well as virtual ways of coping and processing that are only now being explored. Grieving has always been lonely business, and while in isolation that loneliness is heightened. But there is also something comforting about knowing that so many other people are grieving with you. A potential surge in mental health diagnoses. The only precedent we have for the COVID-19 pandemic is the Spanish flu of 1918. Experts predict that the increased stress and negative emotions caused by, but not limited to, unemployment, financial disaster, loneliness, grief, and fear may trigger mental illness. During the crisis, individuals, depending on circumstances, may experience anger, anxiety, avoidance, boredom, confusion, decreased concentration, depression, detachment, emotional exhaustion, insomnia, isolation, grief, guilt, sadness or other symptoms. The severity of these feelings, and our ability to cope with them so that they don't interfere with our daily function, is important. Unfortunately, some individuals may be impaired in the short term, and a subset of these individuals may have to confront longer-lasting psychological impact. The increased rates of alcoholism, anxiety, depression, panic disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. Statistics available thus by far shows 31% said they're sleeping less due to COVID-19 related anxiety. The American Psychiatric Association reports that 36% of Americans said that the pandemic has had a serious impact on their mental health. Suicide prevention hotlines across the country are reporting an uptick in coronavirus-related calls. According to Total Brain, a neuroscience-based mental health and wellness platform, 58% of U.S. employees feel anxious about COVID-19, and 35% of U.S. employees said their anxiety over COVID-19 interfered with their workplace productivity. Chronic stress, and learn to mitigate it. One thing that's clear is that just about everyone is stressed these days. Stress can sometimes be a good thing. Certain types of stress kick us into action. Stress also makes us realize that we're in danger. When your life depends on wearing a mask and staying at least 6 feet away from other people. Brief bouts of stress, even severe ones, can be tolerated. One can bounce back. Tolerable stress, what I call allostatic load, can be an acute life event. The death of a loved one, the loss of a job, an accident. Things that make a person feel a loss of a sense of control. The events may be severe, but if you have a good sense of internal support, good self-esteem, and external social and emotional support, you can weather the storm. But when stress doesn't let up and is paired with the feeling that we have little to no control over the circumstances that are creating it, it's called chronic stress. And that is not good. In fact, over and over again, research points out that prolonged, unremitting stress exacts a toxic toll on the body, brain, and mind, weathering our insides, damaging neural pathways, sapping brain power, and skewing judgment. Unrelenting stress also compromises the immune system and taxes the heart, kidneys, liver, and brain. How will we tolerate this lengthy bout of stress caused by a phenomenon distinctly out of our control, and that has caused so many other elements of life, jobs and economic security, for example, to reel out of our grasp, as well? Can we, cultivate the internal support, and will it mitigate the mental and physical effects of the pandemic? We believed we can take comfort in the communal actions we've already seen during this period. There's a positive message in that we as a nation have responded so quickly. Most folks have heard what the public health experts have said. People have been staying home as prevention. That's a communal act, if that can be built upon. The idea that we're all in this together. I think if that can be maintained, there can be real options for a communal growth. Post-traumatic growth, while not a buzzword that's hit the masses yet, is a phrase increasingly used within the confines of meetings among psychologists and psychiatrists. It's the premise that people grow in profound ways following a trauma. This pandemic has thrown us into an existential crisis. It has put much of what we have believed into question. We are living in traumatic times, and trauma can also bring about growth. One of the ways in which experts predict growth are in learning to cope with uncertainty. Most of us like to think we have a modicum of control over our destinies. And almost all of us have difficulty living with situations we can't control and that have no clear end. But the enormity of the COVID-19 pandemic has forced most of us to admit that almost everything is out of our hands, except, perhaps, washing them. Many people will develop a new ability to withstand this uncertainty. We have to accept life on life's terms. Right now is a time to consider the fact that this is a crisis. It is what it is. We're going to do whatever we can, but the rest is not in our hands. If we see the reality as something that we have tolerance to accept and to be okay with whatever's happening, that could be a very positive thing. Experts also anticipate that Americans will ultimately embrace the slower pace of life the pandemic has forced upon them, and to use their newfound equanimity and time to reevaluate their priorities. A crisis of this magnitude forces people to explore parts of ourselves that have been dormant, or to discover new areas we never knew existed. Some people think it might herald in a higher level of consciousness and awareness, to re-examine what's truly important to us and what we can do without. In Buddhist terms, people are questioning their attachments. They're asking what's necessary and what isn't. There's a lot of us sitting on the sidelines, deprived of our usual lifestyles and social connections, a lot of things we may not have appreciated that gave us a lot of pleasure. We thought we needed manicures, pedicures, haircuts, certain clothes, going to certain places, all the things that went with our pre-pandemic identity. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is what I like to do. All of that got ripped up. The longer we're pausing from normal life, the more we're reorganizing our internal worlds. People will appreciate things quite different than they did before. We all tend to get into habits, and particularly in American culture, we don't take the time to examine or reflect upon those habits. A new perspective is mostly a good thing. This has been an opportunity to notice and maybe change that. Recognizing that life is really so fleeting. Experts also predict that some people will end up leaving their spouses in search of true love, while others will take their relationships to the next level. Still others might quit their jobs, or change fields, or seek meaning in other ways than they had in the past. Many of us will eventually grow in profound ways. People are suffering losses that are life-altering, noting that referrals to the center are up more than 50%. A lot of people are facing a lot of grim realities. Who knows what the fallout is going to be? We have to be very caring and supportive and provide support for individuals who are really going to buckle in the wake of this crisis. We will no longer take much of our lives for granted. We will be more aware of how we are treating the environment. We will value friends and family more. We will have a deeper appreciation for life, and we will question the meaning and purpose of our own lives, which may cause us to change our career trajectory, spend more time with friends and family, be more appreciative of nature, get more in touch with our spirituality. We will get through this horrific moment in our history, and we will eventually go on to not only survive but to thrive. Please like, share and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching. See you on my next video. Ma salama.